Mister, every time you left, you made my mommy cry. Those 11 words shattered 8 years of carefully built silence faster than any bullet ever could. I never believed a child's voice could stop my heart, but that's exactly what happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon outside Jefferson Elementary. My black Escalade waited at the curb, its polished paint reflecting the warm September sun, while parents gathered beneath maple trees, turning shades of amber. I wasn't there for myself. I was doing a favor for a business associate whose daughter had stayed late for choir practice. Simple. 5 minutes. In and out. That was the plan. Plans had a strange habit of falling apart whenever fate decided it was bored. I stepped out of the SUV, adjusting the cuff of my charcoal suit as the cool breeze carried the sound of children laughing across the playground. Their carefree voices felt foreign to me. My world had always been measured by schedules, negotiations, and responsibilities that never slept. Schools weren't places men like me visited. They belonged to people who still believed life followed simple rules. A little girl with long blonde hair skipped down the front steps, clutching a worn purple backpack nearly as big as she was. She couldn't have been older than 6. She stopped halfway across the sidewalk. Her bright blue eyes locked onto mine with the kind of certainty children possessed before the world taught them to doubt themselves. Instead of running toward the waiting parents, she walked straight to me. I assumed she was lost. Maybe she thought I was someone else's father. It happened sometimes. I offered the polite smile I reserved for strangers and bent down slightly so I wouldn't tower over her. Before I could ask whether she needed help, her tiny fingers wrapped around the sleeve of my jacket. She looked up at me without fear. Mister, every time you left, you made my mommy cry. The world around me disappeared. The chatter of parents faded. The distant whistle from the crossing guard vanished. Even the breeze seemed to stop moving. I stared at the little girl, convinced I'd misheard her. What did you say? I asked quietly. She tilted her head, confused by my expression, as though she'd only repeated something obvious. Mommy always cried after you left. She thought I never noticed, but I did. My chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. Children invented stories all the time. They confused faces. They imagined connections that didn't exist. That's what I told myself. Then she smiled. It wasn't the smile that unsettled me. It was the tiny dimple in her left cheek. I had seen that exact smile before. Years ago, on someone I had spent countless nights trying to forget because remembering hurt too much. Before I could speak again, the front doors of the school opened. A woman stepped outside carrying a stack of art projects pressed against her chest. She looked exhausted, like someone balancing too many responsibilities with too little sleep, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her chestnut hair moved gently in the breeze as she searched the crowd. Then her eyes found mine. Everything in her face changed. The color drained from her cheeks. The papers slipped from her hands, scattering across the sidewalk like fallen leaves. Emily Carter froze exactly where she stood. 8 years disappeared in a single heartbeat, and for the first time since I walked away believing she had chosen someone else, I realized she looked at me the same way I had looked at her every single day since, like seeing a ghost she had never stopped loving. Emily did not move. Neither did I. The scattered construction paper fluttered across the sidewalk while children rushed past us, laughing, chasing one another toward waiting cars, completely unaware that 2 lives had just collided without a single touch. Lily looked up at her mother, then back at me with innocent curiosity. She smiled as though she had done nothing unusual. Maybe, in her world, she had not. Children only spoke the truths adults tried hardest to bury. Emily finally inhaled, the sound barely reaching me over the distant rumble of traffic. She hurried forward, dropping to one knee beside Lily with trembling hands. "Sweetheart," she whispered gently, brushing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her daughter's ear. "Come here." Lily frowned. "Did I say something wrong?" Emily forced a smile that looked painfully rehearsed. "No, baby, but we have to go home." Lily nodded, then glanced back at me one more time. "I told him what you always say when you think I am asleep." Emily closed her eyes for the briefest moment. I saw her shoulders rise with a slow breath before she stood again. 8 years had changed her. The carefree college student I once knew had become a woman carrying invisible weight. There were faint shadows beneath her hazel eyes. A silver bracelet rested loosely around her wrist where I remembered a leather friendship band I had given her during our last summer together. Everything else felt hauntingly familiar. She still tucked her hair behind her ear whenever she was nervous. She still refused to meet my eyes when emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Adrian, she said quietly, my name sounding unfamiliar after so many silent years. Please, not here. 1,000 questions crowded my mind at once. Why had she disappeared? Why had she never answered my letters? Why had that little girl spoken as if she knew me? Most of all, why did Lily's smile look so painfully familiar? Who is she? I asked before I could stop myself. Emily looked toward Lily, who was now crouching beside the fallen art projects, carefully gathering every sheet instead of leaving a single one behind. She is my daughter, Emily answered. For simple words. Nothing more. Nothing less. Yet something inside me refused to settle. I had spent years training myself to notice details other people ignored. Tiny habits, expressions, patterns. Lily tilted her head exactly the way I did whenever I studied someone. Even the tiny crease between her eyebrows appeared whenever she concentrated. Coincidences existed. I had built my career assuming they did not. Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice until only I could hear. Whatever questions you have, this is not the place. Before I could respond, Lily ran back with the stack of colorful papers hugged tightly against her chest. Mommy, I got everything. Emily kissed the top of her daughter's head with automatic tenderness. The gesture felt practiced from thousands of ordinary afternoons, the kind of afternoons I had never imagined for myself. Lily reached for Emily's hand, then unexpectedly stretched her other hand toward me. Are you coming too? She asked with complete sincerity. Emily's eyes widened. I could not answer. My voice had disappeared somewhere between memory and disbelief. A silver sedan pulled into the pickup lane, and an older woman leaned across the passenger seat. Emily, honey, are you all right? Emily nodded too quickly. Yes, Mrs. Brooks. We are coming. She opened the rear door for Lily, who climbed inside but rolled the window back down before Emily could close it. Bye, Mr. Adrian, she called cheerfully. Maybe Mommy will smile today. The sedan disappeared into afternoon traffic, leaving me standing alone beneath the maple trees. I watched until the taillights vanished around the corner. Only then did I notice one piece of construction paper still resting on the sidewalk near my polished shoes. I bent down and picked it up. Across the top, written in careful first-grade handwriting with purple crayon, were 5 simple words that made my pulse stop all over again. My family. I stood there long after the school parking lot had emptied, the purple crayon drawing still trembling between my fingers. At the top of the page, the words my family curved unevenly across the paper. Below them stood 3 stick figures beneath a bright yellow sun. A little girl with long blonde hair stood in the middle, holding the hands of a smiling woman on one side and a tall man in a dark suit on the other. The woman's figure had the word Mommy written above it. The little girl was labeled Lily. The man had only one word above his head. Adrian. My heartbeat echoed louder than the passing traffic. Children did not invent names like that by accident. I slowly turned the paper over. In the bottom right corner, written in an adult's neat handwriting, were the words, Wonderful imagination, Lily. Keep telling your beautiful stories. Miss Parker. Imagination. That single word should have comforted me. Instead, it unsettled me even more. Children imagined dragons and superheroes. They did not imagine the full name of a man they had supposedly never met. I slipped the drawing carefully inside my suit jacket as my driver approached from the front of the Escalade. Thomas had worked beside me for nearly 12 years. He knew better than to ask unnecessary questions, yet one glance at my face told him something had changed. Home, sir, he asked quietly. I looked back toward the empty school entrance. No. My voice sounded unfamiliar even to me. Find out everything you can about Emily Carter. Thomas hesitated for only a second. The teacher? I slowly nodded. Without frightening her. Without anyone knowing we asked. He acknowledged with a respectful nod before opening the rear door. During the drive across Manhattan, I stared through the tinted window while the city blurred into reflections of glass towers and afternoon sunlight. 8 years earlier, I had spent every morning expecting my phone to ring with Emily's voice on the other end. Every evening I convinced myself she simply needed more time. Weeks became months. Months became years. Eventually silence became easier to accept than hope. At least that was what I told everyone else. The truth was far less convincing. I had never stopped looking whenever I walked into a crowded restaurant. Never stopped wondering whenever I passed a bookstore we used to visit. Never stopped remembering the way she laughed whenever autumn leaves covered Central Park. My phone vibrated just after 5 o'clock. Thomas rarely interrupted me unless something mattered. "Sir," he said calmly, "I have preliminary information." I straightened immediately. "Go ahead." Emily Carter has lived in Brooklyn for almost 7 years. She teaches first grade at Jefferson Elementary. No marriage license. No record of divorce. Emergency contact is Margaret Brooks, age 68, retired librarian. I listen without speaking. There is also a birth certificate for Lily Carter. My grip tightened around the phone. Father's name. Silence answered first. Then Thomas spoke carefully. "The field is blank." I closed my eyes. A strange mixture of relief and confusion settled over me. Blank did not prove anything. It also did not erase the questions multiplying inside my mind. "Anything else?" I asked. "Only one unusual detail." Thomas paused again. "Hospital records indicate Emily gave birth exactly 7 months after you disappeared from public life following the Romano investigation." 7 months. The number echoed through my thoughts like a church bell. I remembered the last night I had seen Emily. Rain against her apartment window. Her hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate because she never liked coffee. She had smiled when I promised, "I will come back before the leaves fall." I had believed every word. The leaves had fallen anyway. And for the first time since that promise, I realized there might be an explanation neither of us had ever been allowed to hear. Sleep never came that night. I sat alone in the library of my townhouse overlooking the East River, the little drawing resting on the polished walnut desk beside a crystal glass of untouched sparkling water. The city lights shimmered across the dark water like broken stars, but my attention never left the purple crayon family smiling back at me. 7 months. I kept repeating the number as though saying it often enough would somehow change it. It did not. Just after sunrise, Thomas knocked softly before stepping inside with a slim manila folder. He placed it in front of me without a word. Everything inside had been gathered legally from public records and ordinary sources, exactly as I had instructed. I opened the folder slowly. The first page was a photograph of Emily standing outside Jefferson Elementary during a school fundraiser. She wore a simple navy cardigan over a white blouse, holding a tray of homemade cookies while children crowded around her. She was smiling. It was not the carefree smile I remembered from college. It was quieter now, more careful, the smile of someone who had learned to keep going because other people depended on her. The next page listed volunteer activities, weekend reading programs, holiday food drives, parent tutoring nights. She had built a life centered around giving pieces of herself away without expecting anything in return. Another page contained a newspaper clipping from 4 years earlier. Local teacher honored for community service. The article described how she had organized a neighborhood book drive after a small library closed. There was not a single mention of me, not even a whisper of the life we had once planned together. Then I reached the final photograph. Emily and Lily sat on a faded blue picnic blanket in Prospect Park beneath blooming cherry trees. Lily laughed with her head thrown back, while Emily watched her with unmistakable pride. They looked happy, not wealthy, not glamorous, simply happy. Something inside my chest loosened and tightened at the same time. I had spent years convincing myself Emily had chosen another future. Instead, every page suggested she had built one alone. Thomas remained quietly near the doorway until I finally looked up. "Did she ever leave New York?" I asked. "No, sir," he answered. "School records indicate Lily has attended the same elementary school since kindergarten. Emily has worked there for 5 years." 5 years. The realization settled heavily over me. She had never hidden across the country. She had been less than 15 miles away the entire time. I stood and walked toward the tall windows overlooking the river. "Thomas," I said softly, "how many letters did I send after she stopped answering?" He did not need time to remember. 32 that I personally mailed, sir." I nodded slowly. "And how many came back?" "None." I closed my eyes. Emily had never received them. Or if she had never answered. Neither possibility made sense anymore. My thoughts were interrupted by the vibration of my phone. It was an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it before answering. A warm, elderly voice greeted me. "Mr. Knight? My name is Margaret Brooks. I believe we have never met." I remained silent. "Emily does not know I am calling," she continued gently. But after what happened yesterday, I think you deserve to hear something she has never had the strength to say." My heartbeat slowed into complete stillness as I listened. "For 8 years," Mrs. Brooks whispered, "that young woman has ended every birthday by making one wish. She never wished for money. She never wished for an easier life. She only wished that somehow, you were still alive." Mrs. Brooks invited me to her little brick house in Brooklyn 2 days later. I arrived without my usual convoy, leaving the Escalade several blocks away because the last thing I wanted was to draw attention to Emily's neighborhood. The October air carried the scent of fresh coffee and fallen leaves as I walked the quiet street lined with modest homes and bicycles resting on front porches. It felt like a world I had not belonged to in a very long time. Mrs. Brooks welcomed me with the gentle smile only grandmothers seemed capable of giving complete strangers. Her living room was warm, filled with family photographs, knitted blankets, and shelves overflowing with old novels. Nothing expensive, everything loved. She handed me a mug of hot chocolate before taking a seat across from me. "Emily always remembered you hated coffee," she said softly. I looked down at the steaming mug, unable to speak. I had forgotten that detail myself. She never had. Mrs. Brooks reached into a wooden cabinet and carefully placed a weathered storage box on the coffee table between us. "She does not know I kept these," she whispered. Inside were dozens of unopened envelopes, each one bearing my handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. Every letter I had ever mailed was there, their edges yellowed with time, the stamps faded but untouched. None of them had been opened. I picked up the first envelope with trembling fingers. My own name stared back at me beside Emily's old apartment address. "How?" I finally managed to ask. Mrs. Brooks sighed deeply. "They never reached her. After she moved, someone collected her mail before it could be forwarded. Months later, the landlord found these locked inside an abandoned mailbox and gave them to me because he knew I was helping Emily with Lily." I stared at the stack in disbelief. 32 chances to explain. 32 chances that had disappeared before either of us ever saw them. "Why did you never give them to her?" I asked quietly. Tears gathered in the elderly woman's eyes. "Because by the time I received them, she had convinced herself you had chosen another life. She was finally sleeping through the night. I was afraid reopening old wounds would destroy the peace she had fought so hard to build." I understood her intention, but the weight of those unopened letters felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. Carefully, I opened the first envelope. The paper inside had softened with age. My own words stared back at me. "Emily, I know something terrible has happened because you would never leave without saying goodbye. I am coming back. Please wait for me." I closed my eyes. I had written that 8 years ago believing she would read it within days. Instead, it had spent nearly a decade sealed inside an envelope. Mrs. Brooks quietly reached into the box once more and removed a small notebook wrapped in faded blue fabric. "This belongs to Emily," she said. "I should not show you this, but perhaps it is time." She opened to a page dated exactly 1 month after I had disappeared. The handwriting was unmistakably Emily's. "Adrian, today the doctor confirmed I am pregnant. I wanted to tell you first. I waited all afternoon, hoping you would call. Maybe tomorrow. If you are happy somewhere else, I promise I will never stand in your way. But I hope, with everything left in my heart, that one day our child will know the man I fell in love with." The room became perfectly silent. At that moment, every misunderstanding that had shaped the last 8 years no longer felt accidental. Someone had not simply separated us. Someone had carefully erased every bridge that could have led us back to each other. When I left Mrs. Brooks's house, the blue notebook remained etched into my memory more clearly than the skyline stretching across the East River. Every word Emily had written carried the quiet hope of someone who believed love deserved one more chance, even when life had already answered with silence. I sat inside the Escalade without telling Thomas to start the engine. For the first time in years, I realized the greatest mistake of my life had not been trusting the wrong people. It had been believing silence always meant rejection. Sometimes silence was simply something created by another person's hands. "Thomas," I said at last, my voice calm but firm, "I need to know. Who handled my personal correspondence 8 years ago?" He met my eyes through the rearview mirror. "You believe someone intercepted the letters." "I no longer believe it," I answered quietly. "I know it." Thomas nodded once. "I will begin immediately." 3 days passed with unbearable slowness. During those 72 hours, I found myself driving past Jefferson Elementary more than once. I never stepped out of the vehicle. I simply watched from across the street as Emily greeted every child by name each morning. She knelt to tie untied shoelaces, accepted crayon drawings with genuine excitement, and somehow remembered every birthday and every favorite storybook. Lily always ran into her mother's arms after school with the same radiant smile that had first stopped me in my tracks. Watching them together made me understand something I had ignored for far too long. Emily had never needed my wealth. Lily had never needed expensive gifts. What they had needed was my presence. On Friday afternoon, Thomas arrived at my office carrying another slim folder. His expression was more serious than usual. He closed the door before speaking. "Sir, I found the man responsible for managing your outgoing mail during that period." My chest tightened. "Who?" Thomas placed a photograph on the desk. I stared at the familiar face in disbelief. Richard Hale. 8 years ago, Richard had served as my executive assistant, organizing appointments, travel schedules, and personal correspondence. I had trusted him with details I trusted almost no one else to handle. "He resigned 6 months after your disappearance from public business," Thomas explained. "He now works as a private consultant in Connecticut." I looked from the photograph to the unopened letters still resting beside my desk. "Why?" Thomas hesitated before handing me another document. Bank records show that shortly before resigning, he received several unusually large deposits from an anonymous holding company. We traced that company to someone connected with the Romano investigation. The room fell silent. It was not about money anymore. It was about intention. Someone had paid Richard to erase every path leading back to Emily, every letter, every forwarding request, every chance for two frightened young people to find each other again. I leaned back slowly, trying to steady my breathing. Anger came easily in my world. This felt different. It was grief wearing the mask of anger. "Do not contact him," I said after a long pause. Thomas looked surprised. "Sir, not yet." I glanced toward the family, drawings still carefully preserved inside a leather portfolio. Right now, there is something more important than finding out why he did it. That evening, as the sun dipped below the Brooklyn rooftops, Emily unlocked the front door of her small townhouse, with Lily skipping beside her. Before either of them stepped inside, Lily noticed a simple, white gift bag resting neatly on the porch. There was no expensive ribbon, no company logo, only a handwritten card attached to the handle. Emily slowly opened it, and her hands began to tremble as she read the single sentence written in familiar handwriting. "I am not asking for forgiveness today. I am only asking for one honest conversation whenever you are ready." Emily did not call that night. She did not send a message the next morning either. I told myself she deserved the time. 8 years of unanswered questions could not be repaired by a single handwritten note. Still, every hour of silence felt heavier than the one before it. Late Sunday afternoon, my phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. I answered immediately. "This is Adrian." There was a pause filled only by soft breathing. Then Emily spoke. "Tomorrow, 4 o'clock, Riverside Park." Her voice remained calm, but I could hear exhaustion beneath every word. One conversation, nothing more. Before I could answer, the line went quiet. Monday arrived colder than expected. Gray clouds drifted over Manhattan, and the Hudson reflected the color of polished steel. I reached the park 20 minutes early, something I had never done for a business meeting in my life. Children chased pigeons across the walking paths, while couples pushed strollers beneath rows of fading trees. It was the kind of ordinary afternoon I had spent years believing I would never experience. Emily appeared exactly at 4 o'clock, wearing a light tin coat with her hands tucked into the pockets. She came alone. For several seconds, we simply looked at each other. Time had changed us both, but not the way we recognized one another. "Thank you for coming," I said quietly. She gave a small nod. "Mrs. Brooks told me she showed you the letters." "She did." Emily looked toward the river before speaking again. I was angry for a very long time. I did not interrupt. Then I stopped being angry because anger takes energy, and Lily deserved every bit of mine. Her words carried no accusation. Somehow that hurt more. I reached into my coat and carefully removed the bundle of unopened envelopes tied together with a simple ribbon Mrs. Brooks had given me. "These never reached you." Emily stared at them without moving. Finally, she accepted the bundle with trembling hands. She recognized my handwriting instantly. Her fingers traced the first envelope as though touching something impossibly fragile. "You really wrote all of these?" she whispered. "Every one." She slowly opened the oldest letter. Her eyes moved across the page before tears quietly gathered along her lashes. She covered her mouth with one hand. "You said you were coming back." "I did come back," I answered softly. "You were already gone." Emily closed the letter and shook her head. "I waited for months, Adrian. Every evening after work, I checked the mailbox. Every morning, I hoped the phone would ring." I swallowed the weight in my throat. I did the same. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. The wind carried a handful of golden leaves across the path between us. Finally, Emily reached into her purse and removed the faded blue notebook. She placed it carefully into my hands. "I almost threw it away 100 times, she admitted. "I could never do it." I opened to the page Mrs. Brooks had shown me, then turned another page. Another letter. Another date. Every birthday after Lily was born contained a message addressed to me, even though she had never mailed a single one. I looked up, unable to hide my emotion. "You kept writing to me." Emily smiled sadly. "It was easier than pretending you had never existed." Before I could respond, a familiar little voice floated across the playground behind us. "Mommy!" Lily came running toward us, waving excitedly with an ice cream cone in one hand, while Mrs. Brooks followed several steps behind. Lily stopped when she saw me standing beside her mother. She looked from Emily to me, then smiled the brightest smile I had ever seen. "See," she announced proudly. "I told you both that talking makes people stop crying." For the first time since I had met Lily, I allowed myself to kneel, so we were eye level. She offered me the melting ice cream cone with complete seriousness. "You can have the first bite," she said. "Mommy says sharing makes people feel better." I laughed quietly, surprising even myself. "I think you should keep it," I replied. "It looks much better in your hands." She giggled before happily taking another bite. Emily watched the exchange without speaking. There was still caution in her eyes, but it was no longer mixed with fear. It was uncertainty, the kind that came after discovering everything you believed for years might have been wrong. Mrs. Brooks smiled gently before leading Lily toward the nearby duck pond. "Come help me count the ducks," she said. "I think one of them is hiding." Lily eagerly skipped away, leaving Emily and me standing beneath a tall oak tree whose golden leaves drifted lazily onto the walking path. Emily folded her arms against the cool breeze. "She likes you," she whispered. I noticed. Emily looked down for several seconds before finally asking the question I had been expecting. "Do you want to know the truth?" I met her eyes. "More than anything." She took a slow breath. "The day I learned I was pregnant, I called your apartment 3 times. No answer. I drove there after work." Her voice trembled slightly. "Your building manager told me you had left without saying when you would return. A week later, someone delivered a message saying you had chosen your family's business over everything else and that I should move on." I frowned. "I never sent anyone." "I know that now." She looked toward Lily, who was laughing beside the pond while tossing tiny crumbs to the ducks. "At the time I believed it because every day that passed without hearing from you made it easier to believe the worst." I slowly removed my wallet and unfolded an old photograph I had carried for 8 years. It showed the two of us sitting on a park bench during our last autumn together, smiling at the camera while holding paper cups of hot chocolate. The edges were worn from being opened countless times. Emily stared at it with tears filling her eyes. "You kept it." "It never left my wallet." She reached into her purse and quietly removed something wrapped inside a soft cloth. When she unfolded it, my breath caught. It was the silver compass keychain I had given her on her 23rd birthday. The tiny engraved words were still visible. "No matter where life takes us, find your way back." Emily smiled through her tears. I carried it every single day. We stood there in complete silence, holding pieces of a life neither of us had truly abandoned. Then Emily said the words that changed everything. "Lily deserves the truth." I nodded slowly, my heart racing faster than it had in years. "Only if you are ready." Emily called softly. "Lily, sweetheart, come here for a minute." The little girl ran back toward us with flushed cheeks and bright eyes. She slipped one hand into her mother's and looked curiously at me. Emily knelt beside her daughter, gently brushing a strand of blonde hair away from her face. "Remember how you always asked me about your daddy?" Lily nodded eagerly. Emily looked at me for a long moment before smiling with quiet certainty. "Honey, the kind man standing beside us is your father." Lily blinked once, then twice. She looked at me with those same bright blue eyes that had unknowingly changed my life outside Jefferson Elementary only days before. Finally, she smiled the simplest, most beautiful smile I had ever seen and asked the question I had dreamed of hearing without even knowing it. Does that mean you are coming home with us now? For one long, unforgettable moment, I could not answer. Lily's question hung gently in the cool afternoon air while golden leaves drifted around us like quiet reminders that every season eventually changed. I looked at Emily first. She did not speak. She simply gave the smallest nod, as if she was no longer asking me to prove who I had been 8 years ago, but inviting me to show who I could become now. I smiled at Lily and carefully took her little hand in mine. If your mommy is comfortable with that, I said softly, I would be honored to come home with both of you. Lily's face lit up brighter than the autumn sun. She wrapped her small arms around my waist without hesitation, hugging me with the complete trust only a child could offer. I closed my eyes for a second, overwhelmed by a feeling no accomplishment, no success, and no amount of wealth had ever given me. It felt like finding the missing piece of my own life. That evening we shared dinner around Emily's small kitchen table. The meal was simple: homemade chicken noodle soup, warm bread, and apple pie that Mrs. Brooks insisted on bringing over despite Emily's gentle protests. Lily spent nearly the entire meal asking questions. What was my favorite color? Did I like cartoons? Could I ride a bicycle? Had I ever built a snowman? Every answer made her laugh a little harder. Every laugh quietly repaired something inside me that I had not realized was broken. After dinner, Lily disappeared upstairs to brush her teeth before bedtime. The house grew peaceful. Emily and I stood together on the back porch beneath a sky filled with early evening stars. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. It no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt earned. I used to imagine this conversation 100 different ways, Emily admitted quietly. None of them looked like this. I smiled gently. Mine never did either. She turned toward me. What happens now? I looked through the kitchen window where Lily was carefully placing crayons back into a small plastic box before bed. Now I learn how to become the father she already believes I can be. Emily's eyes glistened. That will take time. I know. I nodded. And I am finished running out of time. Over the months that followed, my life changed in ways I could never have predicted. My calendar slowly filled with school concerts instead of endless evening meetings. Saturday mornings became library visits, pancake breakfasts, and helping Lily practice spelling words at the dining room table. I discovered that reading the same bedtime story 5 nights in a row was somehow more rewarding than closing the largest business deal of my career. Emily never asked me to become someone different. She only asked me to be present. It turned out that showing up every day required more courage than anything I had ever faced before. One spring afternoon, nearly a year after that first meeting outside Jefferson Elementary, Lily came home carrying another classroom art project. She proudly handed it to me before running upstairs to change out of her school clothes. I unfolded the paper slowly. Across the top, written in much neater handwriting than before, were the familiar words "my family." This time there were still 3 figures beneath a bright yellow sun, but something had changed. All 3 were smiling, holding hands beneath a little house with flowers growing beside the front steps. At the bottom of the page, Lily had written one final sentence in careful blue crayon. Mommy smiles every day now. I looked toward the staircase where Emily stood watching quietly. Neither of us needed to say another word. Sometimes the greatest victories are not measured by power, reputation, or everything we manage to build. Sometimes they are measured by the tears that never have to fall again.